in a land where justice and chaos collide. One weapon defines the Wild West: the Colt Revolver. The masterpiece was born from the mind of Samuel Colt, and it became the symbol of power, revenge, and frontier itself. But what if I told you the gun didn't just win wars? It built legends, buried enemies, and shaped an era. From the gunfights at the OK Corral to showdowns with legends like Wild Bill Hickok, this is the true story behind the gun that won the West and the blood it spilled to do it. In 1836, a young inventor named Samuel Colt was about to change the world forever. Born in 1814 in Hartford, Connecticut, Colt was fascinated by engineering from childhood, but it was the development of the Colt Revolver that would make him one of the most significant figures in American history. At just 22, Colt received a patent for a revolutionary idea that could leave a permanent mark on American history: the revolving firearm. This wasn't just any weapon. It was a handgun that could fire multiple times without needing to be reloaded, a massive improvement over the single-shot pistols of the time. Samuel Colt's idea was entirely new, and there had been previous attempts at creating firearms with revolving cylinders. But Colt's genius lay in refining the design, making it practical, reliable, and efficient. His Colt Patterson was named after the town where his factory was located, in New Jersey, and it was the first successful repeating firearm. Colt's idea was simple: a rotating cylinder that could hold multiple rounds. When the trigger was pulled, the cylinder aligned each round with the barrel and then fired. This made reloading faster and far less risky in the heat of a confrontation, which is why Colt's invention became such a game changer. At first, Colt Patterson faced skepticism. It was revolutionary, but unproven. Yet Colt wasn't an inventor. He was a showman. He toured the country, demonstrating the revolver to military brass, lawmen, and anyone with a pulse and a purse. But would the military gamble on this unproven invention? Especially in a crucial point, such as the brutal Mexican-American War? Turns out, luck was in his favor. In 1847, Colt got his break. The U.S. military was desperate for a weapon that could help soldiers in the Mexican-American War, and finally took notice of Colt's design. General Zachary Taylor and his troops tested the Colt Patterson, and they were impressed by its power and effectiveness. In just a year's time, the U.S. government had signed the first contract with Samuel Colt for 1,000 revolvers. And this contract marked the beginning of Colt's ascent to fame. However, while the military's adoption was a major victory, the Colt Patterson downfall had just begun. The revolver's early versions were prone to misfires, and the design was still somewhat fragile. But Colt wasn't one to back down. Colt refined the design, and by 1851, he introduced a new version: the Colt 1851 Navy Revolver. The Colt 1851 Navy was more compact, more reliable, and quicker to reload than its earlier version. Its improved design made it incredibly popular, not just with the military, but also with civilians, lawmen, and outlaws as well. And then the Navy model became Colt's best seller. Colt wasn't just selling guns, he was selling an idea. He expanded globally, marketed his revolvers as tools of justice, and turned his name into a symbol of innovation. But it wasn't just the quality of the product that made Colt's revolvers famous. His promotional genius played a huge role. He understood the importance of advertising, and by the time the Colt 1851 Navy was in full production, he was using clever ads that depicted his revolvers as symbols of power and justice. The revolver was no longer just a weapon. It was a symbol of the rugged American spirit and self-reliance. However, despite Colt's success and fortune in his hands, there was one thing that Colt couldn't control, something that threatened his entire vision of his future. But what was it? Well, Colt faced financial struggles for years, especially after the American Civil War in 1861. The war created a huge demand for firearms, and Colt's factory was struggling with orders. But in the middle of all this chaos, something unimaginable happened. Tragically, Samuel Colt died at just 47 from complications related to gout and other health issues in 1862. But in those brief years, Colt had forever changed the course of history. His revolvers armed soldiers in wars, cowboys in gunfights, and lawmen in their daily struggles to uphold justice. The true legacy of the Colt Revolver was still to come, though. By 1873, Colt's Firearms Company introduced a weapon that would forever define the American frontier, and the Colt single-action Army Revolver. But the streets didn't call it that. They gave it a nickname that stuck in history: the Peacemaker. So, what made the Peacemaker so special, and how did it end up defining the legacy of Colt's revolvers? The Peacemaker was no ordinary sidearm, chambered in powerful .45. Long Colt, the Peacemaker featured a 6-shot cylinder, and a single-action mechanism demanded a manual cock of the hammer, and that click became legendary. Its original military model came with a 7.5-inch barrel, giving it solid accuracy at a distance. The U.S. Army adopted it as its standard service revolver, recognizing its balance of power and performance. Later variants offered shorter barrels, 5.5 inches, and even 4.75 inches, which suited quicker draws and easier carries. The Peacemaker's design was pure function meets form. The frame was made of hardened steel, and it featured a loading gate on the side for easy access to the cylinder. So, the users could load and unload rounds individually, rotating the cylinder manually while the hammer rested at half-cock. It was a mechanical marvel for the time, built tough for everyday use. And this gun was tough. It held up in scorching deserts, freezing plains, and mud-soaked trails. In roughest corners of America, it never quit. Beyond performance, the Peacemaker was customizable, and the buyers could choose different grips: walnut, ivory, or mother of pearl. And some models featured detailed engravings and finishes in blued steel or nickel. Colt sold the art you could kill with. As word spread, the Peacemaker became a symbol not just of gunmanship, but of frontier independence. L. Though the Peacemaker was originally designed for military use, its popularity exploded in civilian life, and Colt made sure it stayed relevant. Over the decades, they introduced new calibers beyond .45 Long Colt and adjusted frame sizes for different hands and uses. No matter the changes, though, one thing stayed the same: the Peacemaker's core design remained solid. It didn't need fixing, it just worked. However, that raises a compelling question. Just who were the real people behind the trigger of a Colt revolver? It wasn't just another gun gathering dust in an armory. This revolver was worn on the hips of legends, men who defined the Wild West, some who enforced the law, and others who ran from it. And for every single one of them, the Peacemaker wasn't just a weapon, it was survival. Take Wild Bill Hickok, for example. He didn't just walk into saloons, he owned them. Hickok had a reputation for staying calm under pressure. He was one of the first to trust the Colt. The accuracy and speed became his edge, and that edge wrote his legend. And then, Billy the Kid, who was fast, reckless, and unpredictable. While not confirmed to carry a Peacemaker, its speed and simplicity captured the spirit of men like him. For a young outlaw with a short fuse and a long list of enemies, the Colt was a perfect fit. And ironically, the man who eventually caught up with Billy was Pat Garrett. He carried a Colt, too. It's hard to say for sure what he held the night he pulled the trigger, but records suggest it was likely a Peacemaker, the same weapon used by the kid, now used to end him. Wyatt Earp, you've heard that name. The OK Corral, Tombstone, and Frontier Justice. It's all burned into American memory. But Earp didn't walk into that famous gunfight empty-handed. He was carrying a modified Colt single-action army. Some say it had an extra-long barrel, known as the Buntline Special. He liked distance, accuracy, and control. He needed something he could depend on in a shootout where one mistake meant death. Right next to him was Doc Holliday, a man dying of tuberculosis, but still one of the fastest guns in the West. Doc wasn't just a gambler and a drinker. He was lethal. And the Peacemaker matched his style, quick, efficient, and brutal when needed. Bat Masterson used it too. Lawman, gunfighter, sports writer. He was a complicated man in a violent time. He liked to customize his Colts, but no matter the finish or the grip, it was always about performance. He didn't carry it for show, he carried it to survive. Then there was Buffalo Bill Cody. He was performing for crowds rather than gunning down outlaws in the streets. But he made the Colt a global icon. His Wild West show turned the revolver into a symbol. Something you didn't just fire, but you recognized. Even beyond the dusty towns and lawless saloons, and the Peacemaker found its way into the hands of leaders. General Patton, years before World War II, he carried a custom-engraved Colt single-action army with ivory grips during the 1916 Pancho Villa expedition, a sidearm that later became part of his personal legacy, Theodore Roosevelt. Yes, the president also admired the Peacemaker. During his Rough Rider days, he saw firsthand what it meant to carry a reliable sidearm. He respected it, not just for what it could do, but for what it represented. See, that's the thing about the Peacemaker. It didn't pick sides. It was on the belts of sheriffs and killers, generals and gamblers. And no matter who held it, one thing stayed the same. It was trusted. Because back then, trust wasn't given lightly. If a gun misfired, you died. If it jammed, you were done. That's why this revolver earned its place in history, not just in shootouts, but in stories, in songs, in legends. The Colt Peacemaker wasn't just carried, it was chosen. Yet, how many times did the Peacemaker taste blood before earning its place as a legend of the battlefield? Before Hollywood glamorized it, the Peacemaker earned its anime in blood and grit. This wasn't just a cowboy's toy, it was the U.S. Army's fist. In 1873, the U.S. Army officially adopted the Colt single-action Army revolver as its standard sidearm. Chambered in .45 caliber with a 6-shot cylinder, it packed power, precision, and durability, a trio the military needed as it pushed west. Soldiers knew it simply as the Colt 45, but the way it leveled the playing field on the frontier gave it a nickname that stuck: the Peacemaker. Its timing was critical. The U.S. was deep into the Indian Wars, and the military was stretched thin across a vast, volatile frontier. Cavalry units needed a reliable sidearm for mounted combat and close encounters, and the Peacemaker delivered it smoothly, unlike older percussion pistols, which were slow and fragile. This one fired fast, hit hard, and kept working in mud, rain, or dust. In violent clashes like the Battle of the Little Bighorn or campaigns across the Great Plains, it became an extension of the soldier's hand. Many carried it alongside a Winchester rifle, both chambered in .44, .40, or .45 Colt, to keep ammo simple and survival cleaner. The Peacemaker also served in law enforcement roles, federal marshals, military police, and border patrols. It became a tool of discipline and deterrence in frontier forts, railway towns, and boom cities where violence erupted fast. But what began in war ended in legend. As smokeless powder came into play and new double-action revolvers rose in the early 20th century, the Peacemaker slowly faded from service. Yet it didn't disappear. Instead, it evolved into something larger than itself. Because when the guns stopped firing, the stories didn't. So, what happens when the deadliest tool of the frontier trades its battlefield scars for a spotlight on the silver screen? The Colt Peacemaker found a second life in pop culture. It became the six-shooter of choice in Western films, TV shows, and dime novels. From John Wayne's leather holster to Clint Eastwood's squinting standoff. In The G, the Bad, and the Ugly, the Peacemaker wasn't just a prop. It was the symbol of the Old West. It was clean, iconic, and deadly. Toy companies molded it into plastic. Comic books gave it mystique. Country songs sang about it like it was an outlaw's guitar. Hollywood made it famous, but history made it feared. Even today, it's a favorite among collectors, reenactors, and cowboy action shooters. Its silhouette is unmistakable. Its click, legendary, and its name, Peacemaker, still echoes, ironic and unforgettable, in every story where justice came at the pull of a trigger. And that reverence is recognition of a toll that changed how wars were fought, how law was enforced, and how justice carried out. Sometimes right or wrong, but always swift. It was the great equalizer, and for a young nation built on independence, that mattered. The world moved forward, technologies advanced, but the silhouette of the Colt remained, engraved in stories and immortal in history. What do you think? Did the Peacemaker truly earn its legendary status? Or has Hollywood done most of the storytelling, but times changed, and so did the fight for justice? Now, let's move from the old frontier to the streets of Chicago, where Sergeant William faced danger head-on. This is his story.
Chicago, 1933. The Great Depression gripped the city and shadows stretched long over desperate streets. In this chaos, Sergeant William T. Shanley, a seasoned cop with 20 years on the force, answered a routine call. But that December day, routine turned to tragedy. Shanley was suddenly attacked and subsequently killed, shaking the city to its core. Who dared target a veteran officer? And what dark secret lay behind this brutal act? The answers will take you deeper into the shadows of a city on edge. A humble repair shop at 5320 North Broadway. The kind of place where the air hangs thick with the smell of grease and gasoline. Now, imagine Sergeant William T. Shanley walking into that scene. Not some rookie fresh out of the academy, but a man who'd seen it all. 20 years on the force, he knew the city's rhythms, its dark corners, its hidden dangers. He wasn't just a cop. He was a familiar face in a city that was rapidly changing, and often not for the better. He probably didn't expect this day to be any different. But life, especially in 1933 Chicago, had a way of throwing curveballs, didn't it? What hidden detail in that repair shop on an ordinary afternoon set Sergeant Shanley on a path toward a confrontation he'd never escape? Could a single overlooked moment seal his fate? The Great Depression was the air they breathed, the worry etched on every face. In Chicago, that desperation manifested in a surge of crime. The Chicago Police Department was stretched thin, battling a rising tide of lawlessness fueled by poverty and opportunity. Sergeant Shanley was a key player in this fight, a seasoned veteran whose experience was worth its weight in gold. He wasn't a hothead. He was methodical, thorough, the kind of cop who dotted his I's and crossed his T's. He understood that in this environment, one mistake could be your last. His daily grind took him across the city, from bustling marketplaces to quiet residential streets. He dealt with everything: petty theft, domestic disputes, the occasional bar brawl. But on that particular day, a report came in about a suspicious vehicle parked at that repair shop on North Broadway. Think about it. A suspicious vehicle in 1933 could mean anything. Stolen goods, a hideout, maybe something far more sinister. For Shanley, it was just another call, another piece of the puzzle in the city's ongoing struggle with crime. His partner, for just a moment, had stepped away to use a nearby call box. Those red sentinels on street corners that were the lifeline for cops on the beat. And Shanley, doing what he always did, moved forward with the investigation. Shanley wasn't the kind of cop who sat behind a desk. He was a street guy, through and through. He understood the language of the streets, the subtle tells, the uneasy silences. For over 2 decades, he'd patrolled these very streets, a reassuring presence in a city wrestling with hardship and the rise of organized crime. He wasn't looking for trouble, but he wasn't afraid to face it either. His commitment wasn't about flashy headlines. It had a deeper reason. It was about the steady, often thankless work of keeping the peace, one block at a time. He'd seen the desperation of the Depression firsthand, the hunger in people's eyes, the choices they made out of necessity. It hardened him, yes, but it also fueled his resolve to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. He walked into that garage, the scent of motor oil heavy in the air, the dim lighting casting long shadows. He spoke with the owner, a nervous man probably just trying to make an honest living in tough times. The story was simple. A man had dropped off a car, said he'd be back around 4:30 p.m. Routine stuff, right? A simple stakeout. But as any cop will tell you, routine is often the moment before everything goes sideways. The man never returned. The news of Sgt Shanley's murder sent a shockwave through the entire Chicago Police Department. It was a gut punch, a brutal reminder of the inherent dangers they faced every single day. This wasn't some faceless victim. This was Bill Shanley, a respected veteran, a colleague, a friend. Fear mixed with a white-hot anger. If a seasoned sergeant could be taken down like this, what did that mean for the rookies, for everyone on the force? The pressure to find the killer wasn't just departmental, it was deeply personal. The repair shop became a hive of activity. Detectives swarmed the scene, their shoes crunching on the oily floor. Every inch was scrutinized, photographed, documented. The garage owner, his face pale with shock, was interviewed and re-interviewed, every detail of his interaction with the man who left the car picked apart. Witnesses were sought, but in the Chicago of 1933, talking to the cops wasn't always a popular choice. Fear was a powerful silencer. Naturally, Sgt Shanley's life and career came under intense, dark scrutiny, not because they suspected him of any wrongdoing, but to understand the context, to see if any past cases, any old grudges, could offer a clue. His colleagues spoke of his dedication, his quiet competence, his unwavering commitment to the job. His partner, the man who was just steps away when the unthinkable happened, would carry the weight of that moment, the what-ifs that would likely haunt his sleep for years to come. But the focus quickly zeroed in on the man expected to return for that suspicious vehicle. Who was he? What made his car suspicious enough to warrant police attention? The make and model of the car, any identifying features, became critical details. Little did Shanley know, he wasn't just investigating a suspicious vehicle. He was about to walk into the crosshairs of one of the most dangerous criminal organizations in the country. What became tragically clear in those agonizing hours after the shooting was that this wasn't a case of wrong place, wrong time. Sgt Shanley wasn't a random victim. He was the target of a cold, calculated act of violence. The man who arrived for that vehicle, accompanied by a woman, wasn't just some petty thief. By the time dusk settled over Chicago, casting long shadows that mirrored the darkness of the crime, the manhunt was in full swing. Every cop in the city felt the weight of Shanley's death, a personal vendetta fueling their pursuit. But why this particular repair shop? Was it a prearranged meeting point? A safe house? Or had Sgt Shanley simply stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see? The location, seemingly ordinary, held a deadly secret. Imagine the feeling that must have washed over the city. If a veteran like Sgt Shanley could be gunned down in the line of duty, who was truly safe? He wasn't just a name on a police report. He was a husband, a father, a member of their community. His murder was a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the ever-present threat of violence. The investigation soon unearthed a terrifying truth. The man who pulled the trigger was John Hamilton, a notorious member of the infamous Dillinger Gang. And he was not alone. The name itself sent a shiver down the spines of law enforcement across the Midwest. The Dillinger Gang. Their audacious bank robberies, their daring escapes, their brutal efficiency, they were the stuff of legend and of nightmares. Hamilton, a recent escapee from the Indiana State Penitentiary, was a desperate man with nothing to lose, and Sgt Shanley had unknowingly walked right into his path. Tensions in Chicago went through the roof. The Dillinger Gang wasn't a local problem. They were a regional menace. The fact that one of their key members had murdered a Chicago police officer was a direct challenge to the city's authority, a declaration of war. The immediate priority became finding John Hamilton and the woman who was with him. Their descriptions were plastered across newspapers, broadcast on the radio, whispered in hushed tones on street corners. The manhunt was nationwide, the pressure relentless. The newspapers, with bold headlines and stark photographs, turned Sgt Shanley into a symbol, a dedicated officer who had made the ultimate sacrifice in the fight against a ruthless gang. The public, already struggling through the Depression, was gripped by a mixture of fear and outrage, demanding swift and brutal justice for the fallen sergeant. This was not a random act of violence. It was a bloody collision between a dedicated lawman and one of the most notorious criminal gangs of the era. Sgt Shanley, in his commitment to duty, had unknowingly placed himself directly in the crosshairs of the Dillinger Gang. Investigators soon pieced together the likely reason for the suspicious vehicle. It was almost certainly connected to the Dillinger Gang's criminal enterprises. A getaway car, a vehicle used to transport stolen loot, or perhaps even a mobile hideout. Sgt Shanley, in his routine investigation, had stumbled upon something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The chilling realization that John Hamilton, a known killer and fugitive, was the man who ended Sgt Shanley's life, underscored the immense danger law enforcement faced every day. Could a seemingly ordinary investigation, a routine check on a suspicious vehicle, have placed Sgt Shanley in such mortal peril, face to face with a member of the Dillinger Gang? The tragic answer was a resounding yes. Sgt Shanley's dedication to his duty, his commitment to following every lead, had unknowingly led him into a deadly trap. The woman with Hamilton that day became a key figure in the investigation. Who was she? A fellow gang member? A girlfriend caught in the wrong place at the wrong time? Her identity and whereabouts became crucial, potentially holding more clues about the gang's activities and their network. Word eventually spread that John Hamilton himself had met a violent end, found murdered in Wisconsin, a victim of the very violence he had so readily inflicted on others. It was a grim reminder of the brutal code of the underworld, where even the most notorious outlaws often met a bloody demise. The investigation into Sgt Shanleys death shifted focus. While the man who pulled the trigger was gone, the larger threat of the Dillinger Gang still loomed large. The hunt for any remaining accomplices, any local connections who might have aided Hamilton, intensified. The initial shock and outrage began to settle into a grim determination. Sgt Shanleys death wouldn't be in vain. The fight against the Dillinger Gang and the lawlessness they represented would continue. How many more lives would be touched? How many more families shattered by the violent rampage of the Dillinger Gang before their reign of terror finally came to an end? What was the true cost of their lawlessness? Sgt Shanleys death hung heavy over the Chicago Police Department, a constant reminder of the ever-present dangers they faced. The pressure to not only bring justice for Shanley, but to dismantle the entire Dillinger network became an obsession. Captains and detectives, fueled by a mixture of grief and righteous anger, pored over every detail, every lead, working tirelessly to ensure that Shanley's sacrifice wouldn't be in vain. The precinct became a pressure cooker of activity, fueled by endless cups of coffee and the burning desire for retribution. Every known associate of the Dillinger Gang in the Chicago area was brought in for questioning, their alibis scrutinized, their connections investigated. The focus extended beyond just Shanley's case. It was about crippling the gang's operations in the city. As weeks bled into months, the relentless pursuit of the Dillinger Gang continued. law enforcement agencies across the Midwest collaborated, sharing intelligence, coordinating raids, and tightening the net around Dillinger and his remaining crew. The names Dillinger, Hamilton, and their associates became synonymous with fear and lawlessness, a dark stain on the American landscape. One name in particular became the focal point of the nationwide manhunt, John Dillinger himself. Though he wasn't physically present at that repair shop on North Broadway, his leadership of the gang made him ultimately responsible for the violence, for the chaos, and for the death of Sgt Shanley. His capture became a national obsession, a symbol of the battle between law and lawlessness. The full horrifying scope of the Dillinger Gang's brutality began to emerge, painting a grim picture of the world Sgt Shanley had sworn to protect. They were responsible for the deaths of 13 law enforcement officers in 1933 and 1934 alone, a staggering number that underscored their utter disregard for human life and the immense danger they posed to society. What is the enduring legacy of a lawman like Sgt William T. Shanley, a man who paid the ultimate price while standing against such ruthless criminals? What impact did his sacrifice have on the city he served? The unwavering pursuit of the Dillinger Gang, fueled in part by the memory of Sgt Shanley and the other fallen officers, eventually brought their reign of terror to an end. Through a combination of relentless law enforcement pressure, internal betrayals within the gang, and their own violent natures, the Dillinger Gang was ultimately dismantled, their members either killed, captured, or sent to prison. Sgt Shanley's death, though a profound tragedy, became a powerful symbol of the dedication and sacrifice of law enforcement officers everywhere. His story, though ending in violence, highlighted the courage and commitment of those who put their lives on the line every single day to protect their communities. The outpouring of grief and support for his widow and children was a testament to the respect and gratitude the citizens of Chicago held for his service. And so, the story of Sgt William T. Shanley concludes, a dedicated officer whose life was tragically cut short while investigating what seemed like a routine crime. His encounter at that unassuming repair shop became a deadly crossroads, a stark reminder of the constant dangers faced by those who wear the badge. How does Sgt Shanley's story make you feel? What does his sacrifice say about the cost of law and order? Let us know in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story, please like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the compelling and often untold stories of our past. We'll see you in the next video.